Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Chapter 14. I quickly took my leave of the wig room and the opera house. It was just around noontime, so I had about 5 hours to wait before Daphne came to drive me back to the estate. I felt as though I needed an afternoon devoid of operatic intrigue. It was losing its charm for me, both on and off the stage. And what better way to reconnect to mundane reality than by going shopping? Whatever clever architect had designed the Sidney Bluestein Center for the Performing Arts had the good sense to reserve a major portion of the ground floor perimeter for luxury retail space. A demi-mall that had been dubbed the Plaza. Even opera lovers needed a relief from the emotional rigors of the stage, and opera lovers, especially opera lovers, loved to shop. I was in luck too. From my vantage point in front of the opera house, I could survey all the retail row, which was my name for it. Some of the spaces were ready for business, with their window displays complete, doors open, and wares laid out for sale. Other stores were still working against the clock before the festival's opening day, arranging windows, installing awnings, unloading delivery trucks. On the one hand, it was all an appetizing sight, a string of new stores for me to explore. On the other hand, I sensed they were mostly those absurd boutiques that sell things you'd never think of buying except when on a glamorous vacation. Things like a cotton turtleneck jersey from Switzerland, or a solid copper Zahome pan with a Delaware handle, or a tiny flashlight wrapped in lizard skin, perfect for reading opera programs. It was the kind of merchandise that relied on the ultimate marketing ploy. You don't need this stuff. No one in the world ever did or ever will. But since you're here, pretending to be royalty, why not squander those shekels and buy something anyway? Before hunting for the afternoon's unlikely bargain, I went for coffee at the Chick Cafe I had spied across the plaza. When I got there, I was surprised to find Maurizio, Daphne's resident ragazzo, and my own occasional catamite. I guess Sir Jonathan's libido was contagious. Maurizio was entertaining a hot little friend of his own, a blond, smooth-skinned young man with big, worshipping eyes. They were signing to each other. Their fingers, hands, and arms filled the air with a high-energy field that might have implied an argument, but I'd learned from Daphne that the most animated signing was the most expressive as well. Maurizio saw me and beckoned me to where they were sitting. He wanted me to meet his friend, who, as it turned out, was a hearing, speaking person. We exchanged polite greetings, and I got the unsettling sense that Maurizio was hoping his cute friend would arouse some jealousy in me. But since I was supposed to be the model of monogamy, I improvised my own sign language to tell Maurizio that I thought the two of them were a handsome young couple. He didn't quite understand me, so his friend showed me. A bit overzealously, I thought how to sign my message properly. Once I'd done it, Maurizio shook his head emphatically. No. I asked, "Aren't you a couple?" while I crossed and recrossed the first two fingers of my left hand over the and under each other. Maurizio glared at me. I asked his friend what was wrong. He said, "You asked him if we switch roles when we fuck." "Do you?" I said. Maurizio abruptly got up and stormed off. His blonde friend ran after him, leaving my question unanswered. Cold-hearted Stanley then found an empty table and sat down. I ordered a double cappuccino, nothing on top, just to appease the voice in my mind that alleged, "Every calorie counts." I wanted to arrive in Paris with as little extra baggage as possible. When the coffee arrived, though, I couldn't resist sinking 2 big lumps of raw sugar into the firm, foamy head of streamed milk. As I sipped the bittersweet brew, I recapitulated the impression of the people I'd met and the events that had transpired since my arrival in Abigail by the Sea 3 long days ago. Hell, I could create my own grand opera, a thumbnail version, with a bit of soap stuck under it just to keep the ordinary folk interested. My hostess, Daphne Davenport, had invested a lot of money and emotional energy in this festival. She may not have said it explicitly, but I knew she wanted its success to be big. Front page big. Maybe even garner a future story in opera news. Marcella Ostinato was an aging dramatic soprano whose past glories were dubious given her performance so far. Though she excelled at playing the temperamental diva, her capricious behavior and unreliable voice could subvert the festival's success. Angelo Toscanelli was venerated as an opera conductor, yet, so far, he'd rehearsed the singers like a lamb. Maybe he'd suffered a breakdown at some point, or maybe he was just old and tired and didn't care anymore. Jonathan Byers, the stage director, seemed more intent on buggering Americans than on directing opera. Perhaps that was his Stanislavskian motivation. He also seemed to detest all singers. Then again, Sir Jonathan seemed to detest everybody, but at least he didn't apologize for his behavior, or blame it on a dysfunctional family or unresolved childhood issues. That alone made him almost bearable to me. Rick Jansen had a bit part in my opera of Abigail by the Sea. He was a public utility, taken and used and paid for by someone who needed what he had to offer. Anyone. Was there more to him? Mathilda was Madama Ostinata's dark-eyed, brooding maid who seemed to take everything in and let nothing out. If she wasn't careful, she was going to explode with all those nasty secrets building up pressure inside her. Adam Pearce never got to see his sets and actual performance. Yet the other players in my opera regarded his untimely death as something insignificant, as though he'd simply left town before opening night. But something wasn't right there. No operatic death is insignificant. Bruce David was a homegrown lyric tenor, but somewhere along the way he lost the fortitude, that all-American strength that had made our country great. All stand and salute as the orchestra sneaks in a phrase from our national anthem. The fortitude needed for a major career on the opera stage, Bruce was living proof that musical sensitivity and good vocal equipment were not enough. An opera star also needed the genes, however latent or blatant, for industrial strength bulldozing. Rhonda Luca, an exemplar of the tyrannical stage manager, seemed genuinely and personally concerned about the outcome of this production of Balo. Was she really so dedicated to opera, or had she perhaps invested money in the festival? Was she a closet venture capitalist? Could Rhonda be one of those heiresses who tries to conceal her vast wealth by portraying a wage slave in the workaday world, along with us plebeians, when the real challenge of her life was figuring out what to do with those $1 million dividend checks? That portrayal proved that a clinical dose of caffeine and sugar were surging through my already hyperactive imagination. Carolyn Bowitz was the sensitive soul, who seemed attuned to another time and place with gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages. She was a musician's musician who survived the harshness of the modern world by viewing it through the extremely thick and distorting lenses of her eyeglasses. April Kilkis was probably America's great hope for the next world-class dramatic soprano. Among musicians, it would someday be agreed that not since the young Leontine Price did a singer possess the fine balance of voice, music technique, instinct, presence, and sheer will. But what good would it all do if audiences and critics never got a chance to hear her? Hwang Young Cho was already known through operatic Europe for his rich baritone voice, but that didn't ensure his popularity among American opera-goers who were fickle in their idolatry. Daniel Caravaglio, my beloved boss, had already had his moment of brilliance as flunky to the jet-set hair designer Cornelius Haupt Bettelsmann, affectionately called Betty, by his devoted flock of countesses, duchesses, and marchionnesses. And finally, like the deaf-mute and out of the past, Maurizio seemed to hear and to know all. But as far as I could tell, his only suspect behavior was an unlikely infatuation with me. I may have Slavic genes, but I'm hardly Robert Mitchum. I finished my coffee just in time for the final curtain of my imaginary opus. It wasn't yet 1 o'clock. I still had over 4 hours before Daphne would come for me. I considered telephoning her, but instead decided to do my shopping first. After that, maybe I'd splurge and take a cab back to the estate. During my perusal of the boutiques on the plaza, I found a music store. A real old-fashioned specialty store that sold only vocal and operatic scores and recordings. It was the kind of place you might find in London, a place that would probably know the answer to a question that had come to me while I was having coffee and opera earlier. First, I checked all the catalogs of opera recordings they had, including the historical ones. Then I asked the clerk for assistance, but the answer was the same both times. There was not now, and there never had been available in the U.S., a single operatic recording conducted by Maestro Angelo Toscanelli, which seemed kind of odd for a hotshot conductor, no matter how old he was now. The clerk agreed and claimed that he would have sold a carload of the maestro's recordings during the festival, but there was none to be had. As I continued my shopping tour of the plaza, I did succumb to Madison Avenue tactics. I bought a chamois leather shirt for my lover Rafik. It was a velvety, pale aqua with a band collar and an open, buttonless front cut just low enough to reveal the meat of his furry chest. Yes, it was extravagant and foolish, but isn't everything when you're in love? Besides, when I saw Rafik in Paris, it would be out of my hands and onto his body, which is exactly where such a piece of costuming belonged. An hour later, as I left the last of the boutiques, I felt the need for a pick-me-up before heading back to the estate. I returned to the Chick Cafe, and this time I ordered a sumptuous dessert with my coffee, something called a mocha Nicciola tart, which consisted of espresso-flavored Bavarian cream, piled high in a crumbly, buttery hazelnut shell, topped with, what else? Freshly whipped cream, and then drizzled with melted chocolate. Damn the extra calories. I needed sustenance after shopping. While I indulged my innermost needs, I wrote postcards to Rafik, to Nicole, and to my mom in New Jersey. Nicole got an honest message. The other two got a weather report. I considered sending a postcard to Lieutenant Vito Branco of the Boston Police Department, but I stopped myself. He probably wouldn't remember me anyway. Then again, how could he forget? Instead, though, I sent one to Sugar Baby, care of Nicole, even though I was certain that in Sugar's eyes, Nicole had already displaced me as the resident can opener. When I mailed the postcards, it was just 3 o'clock. I still had 2 hours to kill. I bought a cigarette lighter for the maestro's habit. That took 1 minute. I still had too much time to wait, so I phoned Daphne, but she wasn't home. I told Parker I'd be returning to the estate on my own, and that Daphne should not come for me. I was about to call for a cab, but then realized it was a perfect afternoon, and why not walk back to the estate? I knew the way, and I could certainly use the exercise, especially after the mocha Nicciola tart. But it was a big mistake. The estate was much further, and the climb up to the bluffs much higher than I had recalled. It was over an hour later when I finally arrived at the big house. Daphne was just getting into the Bentley. "I was coming to rescue you," she said. "Did you walk all that way?" "Yes," I gasped. Daphne clucked her tongue. "Silly boy," she said. "When I got home, Parker gave me your message. We both assumed you'd be taking a taxi. Then you should have been here long ago. I was going to, I said, still panting and sweating. But I decided to give my legs a workout. It's a difficult walk if you're not used to it, Daphne replied. You'd best go have a lie down before cocktails. Sounds good, I said. I headed toward the cottage, where I took a long hot shower. Clean and refreshed, I lay down on the bed and let the ocean breeze from the windows cool and caress my body. Just as I was dozing off, I wondered, who's been messing around with Rhonda Luca's computer? A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.